What is going on, my mates? Hope everyone is doing very well. Welcome to the end of the decade. It's really crazy to think that the year 2010 began nearly 10 years ago, and it's even crazier to think how much music has been made in this decade and how many lists are going to be made about music from the 2010s. Today we'll be making a list about the best pop punk releases from the 2010s, as in discussing the best pop punk release from each year, starting at 2010 and working up to present day. Pop punk is a genre that I feel gets as much hate as it does love, because the people that love it really love it, and the people that hate it are very serious about their hatred. Over the course of the decade, the popularity of this genre has risen and fallen, experiencing a pretty serious revival around 2012 to 2016. No matter what, there will always be a market for this style of music, but I highly doubt it will ever permeate the mainstream market ever again, or at least not for a very long time. Even during the peak of its revival, pop punk was nowhere near as mainstream as it was in the early 2000s, where it wasn't a rare occasion to hear Dashboard Confessional or Brand New on the radio. Due to the rise in popularity of rap, combined with the negative perception that the public has towards the genre, it remains a niche style of music with an extremely fervent following that refuses to let it die. And because of that, I see a lot of charm and authenticity within the fan bases and the groups that create this style of sound. Even though pop punk is full of cliches and can feel a little stale at times, it's not all bad. In fact, there are some works that are just plain good, that I would call masterpieces within the genre. And there are some albums here on this list that just stand as a good piece of music, not just a good pop punk album, a good piece of music in general. So here we go, starting at 2010 and going all the way up to 2019. I'm going to spend a few minutes discussing each album, and I highly encourage you to check out any that you haven't heard of and to comment your list down below. I'm not going to lie, I've loved the Wonder Years for a very long time. So much so that I even put their song lyrics as my senior quote. It's not about forcing happiness, it's about not letting sadness win. Doesn't sound as profound as it did when I was in high school. And that's pretty much how I feel about the Upsides as a body of work. No matter what, I'll always love it and have a spot reserved for it in my heart, but maybe it's not quite the life guide that I thought it once was. It's really funny to look back and reflect upon how I used to think about things and perceive information, because I distinctly remember thinking to myself at 15 or 16, wow, I bet this album is going to help me out a lot in life down the road, like a guide. And that's just part of growing up. You realize that some of your thought processes were more short-sighted and naive than you could understand at that time, so you go back and reassess what you believe and why. And that's been my experience with the Wonder Years and pop punk overall. I find myself directly connecting with it less, but that doesn't mean I don't enjoy it or don't like it. It's just the way that I consume it that changes. And as I'm writing this video and reflecting upon the way things used to be, in quotes, I kind of forgot how much the Wonder Years shaped the modern pop punk scene. There was a time where you couldn't go to a show without seeing a Hank the Pigeon crewneck or an I'm Not Sad Anymore t-shirt. And what really strengthened their influence was the fact that they treated their fans so well and developed some serious diehard fans as a result of that. It's almost been hard for me to accept, but over the last year or two, I've come to terms with the fact that the Wonder Years aren't a super relevant band in the pop punk scene anymore, almost like they're from another era. No matter what, I'll always love this band and have a deep appreciation for the impact they've had on my life, and who knows, maybe they're on this list twice. I honestly don't even know what to say about this album. I mean, what can you even say? I don't think it's possible to articulate with words how significant this album was for the modern day pop punk scene. The first time I listened to Under Soil and Dirt was at the end of 2011, and I vividly recall wanting to listen to it over and over again because I had never heard anything like it. I had heard other groups do similar things to what the Story So Far were doing, but there was something different about the way Parker and Friends approached pop punk. And I still feel that way to this day, which surprises me quite a bit. I think a huge reason that this album was so successful, besides it being outstanding, is the fact that it leans a little more on the punk side, which made it really easy for the hardcore kids to get into. I remember in my local hardcore scene, it wasn't cool to like pop punk bands for the most part, but even your most expired beanie wearing Harm's Way crewneck kid would make an exception for bands like The Story So Far or Daggermouth. What really surprises me about this album for myself personally is how well it's aged with me, because I don't necessarily listen to a song like Rome and go, oh, this is so me, but on the same token, there aren't any parts that I hear that make me want to crawl up the chimney. I mean, there are a few parts in here where I'm thinking to myself, okay, maybe that level of anger wasn't necessarily warranted, but I think Parker was in the ballpark of 18 to 20 when this was recorded, so I'm sure he's changed his stance on certain things. Under Soil and Dirt is the type of album that can't be recreated, mimicked, or copied. Many bands have tried and many have failed, but it's a tall task to capture youth and angst in such an authentic manner in the way the Story So Far does. Even though I know it's not perfect and it has its flaws, this album album will always be a masterpiece as far as I'm concerned. And it's just one of those albums that will always be brought up when talking about the genre. It's that good. There was a point in time from about 2012 to 2015 that this CD was the only thing playing in my car. At that time, I was driving a 2004 Honda Odyssey minivan, and it of course didn't have an aux cable, so I just played whatever CDs I had with me. And for about 3 years there, all I had in my car was Misadventures by Such Gold and Young New England by Transit. What I'd do was I would go a few days listening to one and then put in the other one when I felt like the time was right. So let me tell you, I know this album pretty dang well. It's actually pretty similar to Under Soil and Dirt as far as it being more of a punk release than a pop punk release. You could honestly probably get away with calling it melodic hardcore, and I don't think anyone would bat an eye. Without exception, there is not a single track on here that's not fast, catchy, and punchy. Everything hits super hard and is reinforced with passionately angry lyrical content. Some of my favorites being My House Stays Clean When I Don't Let People Inside on Storyteller, and then we had these lines from Committee Circus, which I'd say are my favorite on the record. And so you'll find what you thought that you despise, a group that holds you in by shutting others out and comes conveniently disguised. If I ever make a video about bands that I think should have been bigger, Such Gold would be high on that list. They easily could have become one of the bigger names within this style of music, but I guess it wasn't meant to be. This may be considered a hot take, but I feel like what drastically slowed their momentum was the release of their following album, The New Sidewalk. It sounds crazy, but I think the album artwork really turned away lots of potential listeners and even people that were already keen on them, because I overall enjoyed that record and thought it was mighty fine, but the album artwork just wasn't my cup of tea. I feel like out of every album on this list, this one is the least known, so I want to make a very special point to say, go check it out if you never have. You might fall in love with it. This right here is an example of an album that transcends pop punk. This album's reach went so far beyond the scene that it was tied to that I'm still blown away to this day. For example, there's this music website called Sputnik Music, very similar to Pitchfork in terms of the culture, and The Greatest Generation ranked number 6 on their charts, which is insane. Typically, people on that website aren't too fond of pop punk releases, but The Greatest Generation was championed. Soupy's lyricism and storytelling abilities are off the charts here. Each song locks you in so hard with a compelling narrative and rich lyrics detailing what it's like growing up in the suburbs, even down to the brand of his grandma's smokes. I'll always associate this record with getting to do stuff with my dad, because I remember pre-ordering it on our way to Pahrump, Nevada when we did our yearly trip to buy totally legal and safe fireworks. It wasn't too long after that in which his health did a crazy nosedive, and now he's lucky to leave the couch. And that's one of the many things that makes music so powerful. It helps you remember stuff. I'm sure that I would have remembered those great times regardless, but to have a song or a record that you can use as a time marker is such a neat concept to me. This album contains what I'll call the greatest modern day pop punk song. And I know that's pretty bold of me to say, but I mean it. Throughout the record, we hear 12 different stories ranging in subject matter from battling depression to dealing with addiction. And at the end of it, we're rewarded with an anthem, a finale. I Just Want to Sell at My Funeral is the final track on The Greatest Generation. It's somewhat of a recap referencing different points from previous tracks, but most of all it serves as a sense of closure, like you're reading the last page of a really good book. It feels like all the prior issues were wrapped up, dealt with, and are now looking towards the future with a sense of clarity. Things aren't perfect, but you know your feet are on the right path. Here are the final words of the song to really drive home what I'm saying. I'm sick of seeing ghosts, and I know how it's all gonna end. There's no triumph in waiting, there's no sunset to ride off in. We all want to be great men, and there's nothing romantic about it. I just want to know that I did all I could with what I was given. I like to refer to You're Gonna Miss It All by Modern Baseball as the pop punk shot heard around the world, because no one was really expecting it, and to a lot of people it kind of came out of nowhere, and on top of that, it happened to rock really hard. I don't even think the guys in Modern Baseball were expecting this album to be so huge, because their singer Brendan made a bet and said he'd shave an avatar arrow into his head if they hit 500 or 1,000 pre-orders, something like that. And it's safe to say they reached that and then some, because as soon as they dropped Your Graduation, it blew up and they received over 5,000 pre-orders. To this day, that's still one of the biggest, if not the biggest release that Run for Cover Records has ever seen. I can specifically remember walking home from school particularly fast exactly a week before the album was scheduled to come out, because back in the day, as in not that long ago, it seemed like every album streamed in full 1 week early. Like that was an important part of the album promotion cycle. It's not really like that now. I think it's a relic of the past due to services like Spotify and Apple Music, but I remember walking home really fast so I could listen to the stream of the album on Pitchfork on the family PC running on Windows Vista and had a monitor that looked like this. 5 years later, it still sticks out super hard to me as one of the best efforts from this wave of pop punk and emo music. Modern Baseball really had the best of both worlds because they were loved in the pop punk scene, yet got a decent amount of praise from from the kids that were into real emo. And this is probably just my nostalgia and fake memory speaking, but I feel like everyone loved them. Like, even if you didn't care for their music, you could still admit that they were cool guys doing cool things. Modern baseball is the type of band that comes along once in a lifetime, often passing by so fast that you don't even take notice of them until they're gone. Now all we can do is cherish them and do our part to help their work shine bright forever. I feel like a lot of people that are going to watch this video have been loving this album for a while and have known about Neck Deep for a while. And I just want to say, it's so ridiculous how big this band is now. There's not a single pop punk band from their class that's even close to as big as Neck Deep is. State Champs would be the closest thing, but Neck Deep still dwarfs them in terms of popularity. Life's Not Out to Get You came out at the perfect time. It would have done well regardless, but the timing was extremely optimal, because when it came out, so much of pop punk was sad. It was during the sad boy era, as my friend Finn McKenty calls it. Even the title, Life's Not Out to Get You, is the antithesis of being sad. The title is promoting a positive message, which I don't think any popular pop punk bands were doing at that time. Back then, the cool thing to do was to hate on your ex, even if they were a great person, and be as sad as possible while listening to Clairvoyant. So this album was incredibly out of left field, and it was kind of a risky move because Sad and Angry was what people were seemingly devouring. But I guess that just goes to show, if you really commit to doing something different and do it better than it's ever done before, people can't help but pay attention. If you're making good quality work, people will find it. That's why I never fret over things like algorithms, not because I think my work is so great, but because I know that if I keep working hard and focusing on that, I'll naturally improve and get better at what I'm doing, which will lead to success. Focusing on trying to beat the algorithm won't take you as far as working hard each day to improve your craft. I'm for sure going to do a full video about this album at some point, but until then, I'll leave you with this. I love this album so much. So much. And I'm not gonna lie, I actually slept on it for almost a year until summer of 2017 when this record accidentally became an anthem for my friends and I. I remember the first time we listened to Microwave was when we were at a house I was house sitting at. We had just gotten out of the pool, it was about 10 at night, and we were sitting at the kitchen table. My friend asked me if I had heard of a band called Microwave, and that's about where my memory fails me. This album feels like sitting outside in the rain with your best friend on a wet bench under an umbrella that's filled with holes, but being completely okay with that because you know things are going to get better in the future, and you're able to use this time to reflect on how much you love your best friend and why. There's something about this album that flawlessly captures the feeling of not having it all together in terms of life stuff. Not knowing where you're going, not doing everything you should be, and knowing that you'll have to face all of it at some point. And that's pretty much where my friends and I were during that summer. There were 3 of us, me, Jonah, and Javen, and somehow we were able to work together to amplify one another's worst qualities and enable every bad behavior possible. I wouldn't be who I am today if it weren't for those people in those times, so I'll always look back fondly at that point in my life and be forever grateful that I got to take much love with me as a souvenir after all of it. If you've never listened to this band, check out their song Lighterless and you'll be immediately hooked. What kind of band names their debut LP Greatest Hits? It's just so goofy and ridiculous that it takes a band like Remo Drive to be able to pull it off. They're fun, over the top, and silly, and it works for them. They're professional silly dudes. Just look at their music videos. Now, I'm not exactly sure how this happened, but in early 2017, Remo Drive's music video for You're Killing Me blew the heck up, and that really put them on my radar. I'd heard of them previously because my artist friend Corey Purvis did work for them, but I honestly didn't care for them until Greatest Hits. What struck me so funny about You're Killing Me and a lot of songs on Greatest Hits is that it feels like they're almost making fun of the music they're playing, being over the top and ridiculous on purpose to poke fun at those who express over the top sentiments in a non-ironic way. But none of it feels mean or malicious, it just comes off as their critique on areas where the genre could use some work. It feels like the product of kids who grew up listening to a lot of pop punk and emo, took notes on things that made it suck, and then removed all of those things when they made this album. Even Anthony Fantano had good things to say about Greatest Hits. And I know that's just the opinion of one man, but he rarely reviews albums from bands like Remo Drive, and it's an even rarer occasion that he gives that album a positive score. What really made this album jump out at me on first blush was the great use of pacing. There's some really great songwriting going on here. As Christian from The Hotelier said, there's one thing that separates a good artist from a great artist, and that is pacing. Remo Drive is great at ebbing and flowing, making the song get big, knowing where to make it get smaller, knowing where it should explode and where it should fade out and taper off. This is a major component that makes it stand tall in a sea of similar works. Since The Story So Far released What You Don't See in 2013, I'd been waiting for proper dose. And what I'm getting at when I say that is, I loved what they were doing on Under Soil and Dirt and What You Don't See, but I was ready for a slight change, maybe switch up the formula a bit. And that's exactly what we we didn't get with their 2015 self-titled album. So it's safe to say that I was heavily anticipating Proper Dose, and I think a lot of people were. And I think most people got what they were wanting. I know it divided up the fan base a little bit, but that's to be expected when there's a stylistic progression. The best thing about Proper Dose is the variety within the track list. To me, it looks like there are 3 different types of tracks that you'll encounter on here. We have songs like Out of It that capture the energy that the story so far are known for, and then there are tracks that I'll call semi-acoustic like Let It Go that feel more stripped down, and then we have the really soft slow tracks like Growing on You. And that's what I'd been craving as a longtime fan, some sense of progression mixed in with a little variety, and they nailed it on this one. They were able to convey that their creativity isn't just limited to what they can accomplish within the scope of pop punk, and that their sights are set much, much higher. I'm honestly not sure if we'll get another album from these guys because they don't strike me as the type of people to force a band, so if it works, it works. If this is the final album, then they've had one heck of a run. But I have this suspicion we'll get another one from them. I really think we will. I think Pup is one of the best bands out right now, just as a general statement. Like, I don't think there are many bands out there at this moment that are as good, as consistent, and as passionate as Pup. Morbid Stuff is the follow-up to their critically acclaimed 2016 effort, The Dream Is Over. I think the only thing that Pup actually has trouble with is releasing terrible music. It is a fact that they have not released a single bad piece of music in the entirety of their career. They currently have 3 LPs and each one is outstanding and arguably better than the last, but they're all really good. Their music will melt your face off only for you to buy a new one to have it melted off again. The word morbid is defined as an unhealthy interest in disturbing and unpleasant subjects, which is this album to a T. The lyrics hold nothing back and it's all out there on the table. And what I like about Pup is that they're very self-aware even within their own lyrics. This line from their single Kids perfectly demonstrates their sense of clarity. Your little songs are getting way too literal, how about some gosh darn subtlety for a change? And the following verse exemplifies the dark subject matter this album is soaked with. I feel like I've come untethered in a room without walls. I'm drifting on the dark and empty sea of nothing. It doesn't feel bad. It feels like nothing at all. I'm sure my opinion will change over time because I love this band a lot, but right now this is my favorite thing they've done so far. But I implore you to check out their other 2 albums as well. You will not be disappointed. My mates, thank you so much for coming over and checking out my dang decade list. This is a pretty tough video for me to make, but I stand firm on my decisions. If you have time, make your own list and drop it in the comments, or better yet, make your own video. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, my mates.